As many of you know, I am a nerd, a great big fat science fiction nerd, and I love to waste time. It's not really waste, it's fun, right? I love to waste time and goof around reading all kinds of science fiction novels and stories, and Ian Banks is my jam, okay? That's the kind of thing I really get into. Unfortunately, when reading that, I encounter an awful lot of nonsense. Nonsense that is taken seriously by more than just science fiction writers. I have a healthy respect for science fiction writers. I think most of them are quite aware of how things actually stand and realize that the work they're writing is fantasy, fun stuff, not an attempt to capture the reality of the universe. Okay, so anyway, I've been reading all this stuff and I keep running across a few terms and I'm just going to throw them out at you. They're probably familiar to everyone. One of those, for instance, is the Drake equation. Can I say I hate the Drake equation? I really do. I think it's been a colossal time suck for decades now. What it is just simply a simplistic string of parameters that you can fudge any way you want to give whatever answer you want. That isn't science. That's garbage. Okay, so I know somebody's going to come along and argue, oh well, but it gives us some framework to. Nah, it's nonsense. Everything we discover for real about any possible alien life is going to tell us we can just throw this out. We're going to reset from zero as soon as we find alien life of any kind. Okay, another term I hear a lot is the Kardashev scale of galactic civilizations. This is an attempt to rank imaginary civilizations by the mechanism and thoroughness of their energy exploitation in their environment. Do you use just a planetary energy, or do you use a whole star system's energy? Do you use a whole galaxy's? Once again, this is fantasy thinking. There are no known examples of any Kardashev civilizations other than ours, which they argue hasn't quite reached civilization level 1. So it's, again, fun games to play in your head, but not very meaningful. Then another one that comes up a lot that you've probably heard of is the Fermi Paradox, which is not a paradox. And to their credit, the people who babble on about the Fermi Paradox recognize that it's not a paradox. It's an observation. It's the observation that we don't have aliens scooting around our planet all the time. So it makes you wonder, where are they? How come they're not here? Sure. It's as if we expect any aliens from a distant star would be interested in visiting this planet in anything but a scientific, speculative sort of way. And they probably aren't, if there are any. So it's meaningless. But what I want to talk about today is another concept that's been getting thrown around a lot. That is the idea of the great filter. Okay, this is the explanation for the Fermi Paradox. It insists there must be some gigantic obstacle to the progression of intelligent species. That something happens so that a civilization is progressing, it's evolving along a path of greater and greater power and intelligence, and then they slam into a wall of some sort and get stopped cold. And that's why we don't have aliens visiting us. They are also arguing that it's important for us to figure this out because there is some potential limitation that might restrict our destiny. So we got to find out what that is. Okay, it's more nonsense. Anyway, this was first proposed by the creepy wanker economist Robin Hanson. I could be talking about Robin Hanson, but I'd rather not. Creepy is the word. He's not. Just set him aside. Let's just talk about his idea for now. This was proposed by Robin Hanson. There's a paper I will link to down below where he postulates this. And worst of all, it has infected much of YouTube. There's stuff all over YouTube about the great filter. Kurzgesagt, for instance, has a ridiculous video on it. I'll link to that down below too, so you can get their side if you really must. It's very pretty, it's very cartoony, it's full of ridiculous assumptions, and it personifies many of the problems with the whole great filter idea. And then another one is, there's a blog post by a guy going by the name Wait But Why. I've run into him before. I can't stand him. He's long-winded. He doesn't really have any depth of understanding, but he recites the party line about the great filter. His other problem is that he's a sycophant for Elon Musk. So, no, I don't care much for him. But just in the interest of being fair, yeah, look down below if you must. So anyway, they all postulate that there's this great filter that's standing in our way, and we're supposed to be concerned about it because it has existential consequences for us. Okay. When you first get into this stuff, you'll discover there's all these assumptions that just don't make sense, that don't fit any understanding of evolution or biology, but okay, they throw them out there. So for example, Kurzgesagt says to imagine life as a series of steps, little stair steps going up. It's a staircase, and we are supposed to climb it. Throughout this argument, there's an assumption that there is a best direction to take, that it's a staircase at all. The staircase is only visible from the perspective of our current position. Yeah, it's like you can look back on your life and you can see all the steps you took to get to where you are now. And you could pretend that is an inevitable progression, and that's the right nature of things, but it wasn't. It could have gone in all kinds of different directions for all of us. Yet, by pretending that this is an intrinsic progression, we're kind of distorting history here, but that's what they're doing. Okay, so in this video, the great filter is illustrated as a metaphorical wall that is surrounded by the dead bones of aliens piled up after failing to cross it. Now, I hope it's not supposed to be literal. It's a cartoonish metaphor to illustrate how they're thinking about it. But this is the vision that shapes their perspective, and it's false. First thing, there are millions of doors. Lots of different ways that life could evolve. There's doors, not walls, to our future at every step. And what we might choose to not take one that leads us to become space colonizers is not a representative of failure. You don't have to evolve into spaceman spiff in order to live a good life, okay? But there's just this assumption that, oh yeah, if you don't take this path, boom, you smash into a wall and your species goes extinct and it's all over with. That's just, again, not the way it works. Another assumption they don't seem to be conscious of is what they're suggesting. That Hanson, for instance, has a list of transitions similar to what we need to become a star-faring empire. Okay, this is our destined path, and I'll include those right here. So here's what he says. Consider our best guess evolutionary path to an explosion. He assumes that we are heading towards a successful explosion and radiate out over the universe, which leads to visible colonization of most of the visible universe. And here's his steps. The right star system, reproductive something, always in that precise. So something like RNA, simple prokaryotic single-cell life. Then we get complex I just want to tell you, prokaryotic life is really complex and sophisticated too. And so this is kind of, here's another example of the bias. So complex single-cell life, then sexual reproduction. Can I just point out that not everything reproduces sexually? It's just this narrow parochial vision of what life is supposed to be life. It's supposed to be complicated, it's supposed to be multicellular, it's supposed to be sexual, and it is supposed to be all about using tools and having big brains. Okay. And he says where we are right now is somewhere after acquiring those big brains and tools. And then the next step is some kind of colonization explosion. This list of steps is not intended to be complete. Yes, he's correct there. It is not at all complete. It's retrospective coronation, for one thing, to use a Stephen Jay Gould term. It's not reflective of reality. And he says, the great science implies that one or more of these steps is very improbable. There is a great filter along the path between simple dead stuff and explosive life. Oh, that's quite the binary contrast he's setting up. The vast majority of stuff that starts along this path never makes it. Again, here's this implicit assumption that not achieving the end he thinks is desirable means you haven't made it. He says, in fact, so far nothing among the billion trillion stars in our whole past universe has made all the way along this path. There may, of course, be such explosions outside our past light cone. So, yeah, we've never seen this, yet somehow it's supposed to happen. Think about it a little bit. Maybe this is not our path. Maybe the reason we're not seeing this particular path play out is because it's a work of imagination that doesn't fit reality at all well. So yeah, it's definitely not complete. Although later in the article, he weirdly raises his hand and guesses this specific number that maybe there are 11 steps after, what was it, after multicellularity or something. He has no clue. It's all imagination coupled to a preconception that life is a sequential progression. And then we're all just waiting for a series of breakthroughs to achieve our rightful domination of the universe. None of this is correct. Hanson even has the arrogance to suggest that we need to be reconsidering biology. Biology already has this subject covered. And biology thinks Robin Hanson is full of crap. Okay. So think through his steps. What he is suggesting is that our species needs to go through a radical change equivalent to acquiring multicellularity or the shift from furry mammal to tool and fire-using primate. These are huge biological changes. We're talking about major shifts in our genetics. We are talking about the emergence of whole new species that have these properties. Not us, new species. So we're not talking about the survival of the human race then, but about the advancement of a non-human, radically variant descendant with virtually no commonalities with us. Again, he's assuming that this future spacefaring species would be a descendant of humanity, but that's not necessarily the case. We may not be the best foundation to build these aliens that fly in space from. That maybe praying mantises would be better. Maybe squid would be better. Okay, we've got all this time. We've got millions of years. Why even think that it's about us? So basically, Hanson and his ilk ought to stop using the pronouns we or us because they're talking about organisms as remote from us as spacefaring salamanders. Okay, so that makes the whole argument kind of silly. But here's their big misconception. There is no path. Evolution doesn't have a preferred direction. Our future descendants could be simpler, even less intelligent, It's all about what works best in a local and proximate level. Becoming more complex or intelligent or aggressive or exploitive doesn't necessarily mean our species will become more successful. It could lead to quite the opposite. So imposing these hypothetical biological goals on us is more a product of our society's cultural imperialism than anything biologically valid. There are all kinds of different directions we could take. Why are they saying, oh, you've got to follow this particular colonial path to fill out the space in the universe? So apparently Hanson has never read Stephen Jay Gould's book, Full House. He should read it. I recommend it to everybody, and I'll also include a link to that down below. It's a really good book that opens your eyes to some of the variation that is actually present in the natural world. So I'll read a bit to you from a good summary of the text. The starting part here is a study of vertebral morphology in a number of mammals, asking whether there is a detectable trend. So we're going to start with this particular study by a guy named Schaefer and explore some of its implications. So McShay did these tests on vertebral columns. And you might say, of course, there was an increase in complexity. But is this increase driven or passive? And we're going to see if there's a surprise here. According to McShay in 1994, vertebrates began at a minimal level of complexity of their vertebral columns. So the only way to go would be up. And quoting Gould from 1996, all the tests provide evidence for a passive trend and no drive to complexity. McShay found 24 cases of significant increases or decreases in comparing the range of modern descendants with an ancestor out of a potential sample of 90 comparisons, or 5 groups of mammals, each with 6 variables measured in each of 3 ways. For the other comparison, average descendants did not differ significantly from ancestors. Interestingly, 13 of these significant changes led to decreases in complexity, while only 9 showed an increase. And those numbers are not statistically different from each other. McShay summarizes his entire study as follows. The minimal complexity of vertebral columns probably did not change. Indeed, the actual minimum seems to have remained close to the theoretical minimum. Ancestor-descendant comparisons in subclades of mammals reveals no branching bias, and the mean subclade skew was negative, all pointing to a passive system. And this can be summed up as follows. Looking at the full house of variation, there is no general trend in progress for organisms or evolution as a whole. If you want to be an evolutionary biologist, you better absorb this message. There are no long-term trends. There's chance variation, and of course there's selection for certain lineages and things like this. But this is not how evolution works, according to Robin Hanson and Kurzgesagt and what but why. They're just, they are so far off base. But it's what they want to believe. They want to believe we're on a trajectory to the future. And that future is going to look a lot like Americans and Europeans in space. And human, of course. It's got to be human. So let me do a little thought experiment to explain why this is a problem. So we don't need a filter, not even a great filter, to get the observed distribution of life and to get what we ought to expect from looking out into the galaxy and seeing what's out there. So here's this simple experiment. Take a meter stick. We're going to start on the left at 0 and take small steps, 1 centimeter at a time. The catch is, though, that whether we move to the right, that is towards increasing numbers, or to the left towards smaller numbers, is determined by flipping a coin. So heads, we move 1 step to the right. towards increasing numbers. Tails, you go backwards to the left. There's an equal probability of either direction. So it's going to be variable. And there is no value judgment here, okay? Small numbers are just as valid as large ones. There's nothing inferior about 2 centimeters versus 78 centimeters. And that's going to be one of the harder things to get out of your head, is this idea, oh, well, I'm going for the far right end of the meter stick. No, you're just going to take whatever comes as it comes. So we're going to repeat this experiment. We're going to flip this coin 100 times and figure out where we end up on the meter stick. So we'll record our final number. And then we'll do it again and again. After we've done it a few thousand times, we'll look at the distribution of final numbers. That's why this is a thought experiment. It'd be really boring for me to sit here flipping hundreds of coins thousands of times to see where we end up. But you can see where it goes. And you could probably also, many of you, throw together a simple computer simulation that would show how it works. The end result, I can predict, though, most of your numbers will be small. You might get a few in the 10s and 20s, but generally what will happen is there'll be kind of a wobbling around a central point with occasional excursions in one direction or the other. It's possible you could get a score of 100 centimeters, the max, right? But that's highly improbable. That would require rolling 100 heads in a row. And again, that can happen, sure, 1 in 2 to the 100th times, but it's going to be really, really rare. And the important thing, though, is that this is what life looks like. Most organisms are single-celled. They've been bouncing around there at the base of the meter stick because that's what they do. It's perfectly good. It also turns out to be a really successful way to persevere in the environment because you can get numbers, individual numbers in the population really, really high. So most of the things that live on this planet are down there in the low numbers of complexity, but high numbers in population. So most organisms are single-celled. It's decidedly skewed to the left side of the meter stick. A very few, have gotten to larger numbers, more complex sizes. You don't need a great filter. This particular exercise perfectly models what we'd expect to see, is that the individuals on the far extreme of complexity would be hugely rare. There's no particular preference for nature to generate those forms. It's just, hey, chance leads you this way. If you can keep going, you keep going. So this is my answer to the great filter. You don't need it. That the normal way that biology proceeds, you'll end up with species following random paths all over the place. They won't go in one particular direction. They are not aspiring to reach the end of the meter stick, okay? They're just being what they are. And you might still occasionally get a few species that end up way out there with high complexity numbers, but they'll be a great rarity. Also note that this idea that your sequence of numbers would hit a boundary and then crash to a stop in a pile of decaying alien skeletons has no connection to reality. What probably happened with most species in the universe is they might march along for a while and then they get to a point where chance just says, okay, you're better off backing off a little bit. And that's what they do. So you don't have to go to the end. Okay, so that's my lesson for the day, all right? Don't take this nonsense about the great filter seriously. Drake equation is garbage. Kardashev civilizations, no, we've never seen them. Why are we pretending? All these things are just science fiction nonsense. And what these people really need to do, Robin Hanson, Kurzgesagt, wait but why, is actually learn some serious evolutionary biology And stop telling us that we need to reconsider how biology works. Because what biology is doing is producing results that match reality in the universe around us. To say that because we're not matching your expectations, that's not valid. That's not a real problem. Okay, so I'll wrap it up there. Let me just do my usual of giving credit to these wonderful people who are supporting me on Patreon. I got a good crowd of them doing that. You should join. Sure, if you've got a tiny amount of money, I'm just asking for a monthly donation, and that donation can be as little as $1, and we're good. There's also well, let me just say, the kinds of things I've been putting on the Patreon page, I've tended to emphasize spiders a lot, so I've been throwing a lot of spiders on there. If you want to support me, but spiders make you queasy, there is a tier that you can sign up for, the Architeuthis tier, which is just like the other ones. It's a $5 tier, but the nice thing about it is I exclude all my spider figures from it. So yeah, if you just want to support me, if you want to see what I put on the Patreon page, you can sign up for that and avoid the spiders. Man, that seems like just such an awful selling point. Yes, give me money and I won't stick spiders in your face. How's that? Of course, alternatively, you could just say, I'm not going to give you any money at all anyway. Okay, so look at all these wonderful people. They're all helping me out. It's been great. I am going to close this out, though, by showing you a little video that I took at the horticulture garden. Mary, my wife, and I have been out collecting spiders fairly regularly, and so I just took a few photos of that. I discovered on Instagram that my photographs of my wife are far more popular than my photos of spiders. Who knew? I don't get it. Well, yeah, she is pretty cute. But okay, so I'll leave you with that. Thanks for listening. Talk to you all later.